There are questions we spend our whole lives trying to answer. There are moments when we think we need some grand solution. But in truth, what we really need is just a moment of stillness. Today's story begins with an unplanned journey. A young woman, carrying a heart full of doubts and wounds, leaves the noisy city behind to rediscover herself. She doesn't know exactly what she's looking for, only that she can't keep living the way she has. And then, deep in the quiet wilderness, in an old wooden cabin bathed in golden afternoon light, she meets an old carpenter, a man she never expected, who ends up teaching her a lesson about faith, honesty, and how to live a life that feels lighter. This is just a small story, but sometimes it's the smallest things that have the power to change an entire soul. Sometimes we don't plan the most important things in life. They arrive quietly, unexpectedly, like a passing breeze. This story begins just like that, with a single aimless step into the silent mountains. The young woman's name was a final-year psychology student. After months of exhaustion and doubt, and decided to take a few weeks off from school. She told no one. She simply packed a small backpack, a few sets of clothes, a notebook, and an old camera. She didn't have a clear destination. All she knew was that she needed to find a place with no deadlines, no grades, and no questions like, "What do you want to do after graduation?" or "Are you good enough yet?" She just wanted to go somewhere, anywhere her mind could finally breathe. A dusty red road led her to a small valley where time seemed to move more slowly. Golden sunlight poured over thatched rooftops, and a gentle breeze whispered through the trees. It was there that it happened upon an old man, a carpenter who lived alone in a humble wooden cabin tucked beneath the shade of an ancient tree. His hands were calloused, his eyes gentle. He was sitting under the eaves, carving a small piece of wood into the shape of a bird. When he noticed him quietly standing by the roadside, he simply smiled and said, "If you're not in a hurry, come in and have a cup of hot tea to warm up," and hesitated, then nodded. She sat on an old wooden chair, breathing in the faint scent of green tea carried by the wind. No one asked too many questions. She didn't have to explain a thing, and maybe because of that, she felt like she could just be herself. A little while later, as the sky began to fade into dusk, and looked up and softly asked, "How long have you been living here alone?" The old man smiled. "A long time. I stopped counting. It's peaceful here. No one's pushing to become something." A gentle silence settled between them, and glanced down at her notebook. Inside were bits of notes from the books she had read, one of which included passages from the Bible. Curious, she looked up and asked, "Have you ever read the Bible?" The old man raised an eyebrow. "Never have, but if there's something worth hearing, feel free to read it to me." That simple, honest answer was the beginning of a conversation and would never forget. And opened her notebook and gently flipped through the worn pages. The scribbled lines, written during sleepless nights and quiet rainy afternoons, now came alive again under the golden hue of sunset. She paused at a short passage she had once marked with a red underline. "Why do you worry about clothes? Look at the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." And read slowly, each word soaking into the stillness around them. The old man didn't say anything. He just sat quietly, a cup of tea in hand, eyes gazing into the distant mountain ridges. It seemed he wasn't just listening with his ears, but with his whole heart, and continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." A breeze passed by, gently rustling the wooden eaves. The old man set down his cup and gave a slow smile. Those words are beautiful. Whoever spoke them must have had a clear and gentle soul, and couldn't hide her surprise. She hadn't expected someone who'd never read the Bible to receive those words with such depth. But in his eyes, there was no judgment, no lines drawn between religion or belief. Only a quiet openness, a pure willingness to listen. She turned to another page. A different passage, shorter, but more powerful than any philosophy she had ever studied in a classroom. "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you'll find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. As soon as she finished reading, the old man rested his hand on his knee and slowly nodded. That's truth, he said. If a person lives with honesty and dares to face what they're truly searching for, then sooner or later, they'll find what's right. Not because of magic, but because the human heart always knows what it needs, if it's quiet enough to listen. And looked at him, and a strange feeling began to rise in her chest, as if the thing she had been searching for all along had suddenly become close enough to touch. In that moment, amid the soft rustling of leaves and the warm light of dusk falling gently over the cabin roof, the old carpenter sat in silence. Not distant, not absent, but quietly present, with eyes that held something beyond words. A slow kind of reverence, like a small flame glowing steadily in the heart of someone who has lived long and deeply. He lifted his gaze toward him, not as if he were looking at a young girl reading a few lines from a book, but as if he had just witnessed something ancient, something sacred, come alive again in the middle of an ordinary day. You know, he began slowly, his voice low and warm. Those words, I don't think they belong to any one religion. They rise above boundaries and labels. Because only someone who has truly lived, who has hurt, feared, and lost their way, could speak something so simple, yet so deep, and sat still, saying nothing. The words she once thought of as just beautiful quotes now felt different, as if they had been stripped of their academic gloss, revealing the raw, honest core of life itself. You see, the old man continued, you don't have to be a monk or a preacher to understand things that matter. You just need to be still enough, and true enough with your own heart. Then he looked over at the half-carved piece of wood beside him, speaking almost to himself. I've lived here more than half my life. No fancy books, no phones, no social media. But I've learned this much. If you sit with yourself, even just half an hour a day, in silence, you'll see there's a door inside every person. And if you knock long enough, that door will open. And suddenly remember the verse. To the one who knocks, the door will be opened. She smiled. For the first time in months, it wasn't a forced smile. Not the kind meant to please others. It was just a smile, real, unfiltered, her own. Sir, she asked gently, what if someone doesn't even know what they're searching for? The old man replied without hesitation. Then start by being honest with yourself. When you're true to your own heart, what you need will find its way to you. Maybe not right away, but it will come. Just like that bird. It doesn't know when spring will arrive, but it sings every morning. And one day, spring returns. The air around them seemed to grow still, tender, and deep. And in that quiet wilderness, where there appeared to be nothing, and felt like she had just found a hidden gem. That afternoon, a light rain began to fall, and sat quietly with the old man under the wooden eaves, a warm cup of tea cooling slowly in her hands. Raindrops tapped gently on the thatched roof, soft, unhurried, echoing the rhythm of life in this hidden corner of the world. The old man didn't preach. He didn't speak of success, enlightenment, or salvation. Yet in every word he said and felt something real, something close, like breath. You know, he said softly, eyes still gazing out at the misty rain. People don't get lost because they lack knowledge. They get lost because they're afraid to face themselves. He turned to him, not with the gaze of an elder speaking to a student, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had weathered many storms and recognized the silent battles that live within us all. People fear what's inside, he said. They fear they're not good enough. They fear that being honest will leave them exposed, vulnerable. So they wear masks, become who the world wants them to be, not who they really are, and said nothing. His words touched something deep in her, places she had tried to silence. The doubts, the weariness, the quiet ache of feeling lost in a noisy world. But listen, he continued, only when you dare to live truthfully, to acknowledge both your desires and your weaknesses. Only then can you begin to touch real peace. and looked down at her tea, then asked softly, "Does living truthfully mean not being afraid of judgment?" The old man smiled gently. "No, it means even if you're judged, you don't abandon who you are. Living truthfully isn't about rebelling against the world. It's about not betraying yourself." Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled gently through the wet leaves, making the trees shimmer. Everything seemed to glow, soft, quiet, alive. Anne opened her notebook and wrote slowly, "To not betray myself. That is the most beautiful thing I learned today." She looked up and smiled at the old man. "Thank you. I don't think. I came here by accident." He didn't reply, just smiled, but his eyes said what words could not. Everyone arrives exactly where they need to be at the moment they need it most. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear after a night of rain. The ground was still damp, but the air smelled of fallen leaves, of earth, of something quietly beginning. Anne packed her small backpack, tucking the notebook into the front pocket close to her chest. She stood on the familiar wooden steps, looking back at the little house where she had spent only a few days. Yet something deep within had shifted. From the back, she could hear the old man working in his shed, the soft, steady rhythm of chisel and saw blending with the peaceful morning air. She didn't want to interrupt. She simply stood there, taking in the scene, as if to imprint it into her memory. There were no grand goodbyes, no tearful hugs or long farewells, because sometimes the quietest partings leave the deepest echoes. But just as she turned to go, the old man's voice called out behind her, and she turned around to see him walking toward her, holding something small in his hand, a piece of wood, carefully smoothed and polished. "I want you to have this," he said. "It's nothing fancy, just a piece I always keep for carving the names of those who stayed here, even just once." And took it gently. Etched into the wood, in simple, uneven lines, were just two words: "True Heart." She smiled. Her throat tightened, but there was no need to speak. A single nod said everything. And with that, she turned and began walking down the narrow mountain path toward the small bus waiting to take her back to the city. But though the road was the same and the sky unchanged, Anne knew something within her had quietly transformed. She was no longer rushing to chase the goals someone else had set, no longer haunted by the big questions she hadn't yet dared to answer. Now, she carried with her something far simpler, yet more precious than anything else: an inner stillness. That evening, back in her small room in the city, Anne opened her familiar notebook once more. On the very last page, she wrote, "The answers aren't out there. They've been here all along, inside me. And when I'm honest enough, still enough, and patient enough, what needs to come will come." She put the pen down and smiled, not because she had figured it all out, but because, finally, she was no longer afraid of herself. Life doesn't lack questions. It only lacks the stillness we need to hear the answers within ourselves. Some lessons can't be found in books, can't be taught through doctrine. They only arrive when we're brave enough to pause and live truthfully, even just once. And didn't find any miracles atop the mountain. She didn't meet some wise, otherworldly sage. She simply met an old man, gentle and ordinary, living in a small wooden cabin deep in the forest. But from that simple encounter, she learned the most important lesson of her life. To find the path forward, you must first have the courage to face yourself. And sometimes, all we really need is someone who listens, a silence deep enough to hold us, and a heart that dares to be true.